Alva of Alva Architects will be taking us through some of the most remarkable works, offering a deep dive into a creative journey behind these architectural masterpieces.
Good evening. It's been close to 15 years since I've spoken in front of an audience. We're a bit of an anachronism as a studio in this day and age. I'm sharing 3 recent projects which happened in our studio of the same period of time. I've quickly put it together and mixed up the narratives to reflect how they went through the studio in parallel. Really do hope they do not come across as confusing and disjointed. I don't have it down pat with the practice teas of regular presenters, so I'm just going to read off my notes and take it as it comes. 2 builds are in this city of Mumbai, and one is in Ladakh, which were among our various projects scattered in India and around the world. Our work is diverse in locale and in identity, scale, program, and build type. The fun and joy this gives us sort of makes up for the strain it puts up on a small studio like ours. One is a very large build near the airport, extremely large spans, severe complications, which I shall elaborate on further. Other private home in what was the suburbs of Bombay. And the third, a small boutique property in Ladakh in an ancient willow orchard. The home in Mumbai was fun. It turned out to be a late 70s build in what was then definitely the burbs then. It had low ceiling heights, 8 to 9 feet slabs, funny arches, severe amount of spalling and corroded rebar. The client had an option of knocking it down and building a 14-odd story structure with the FSI available, like the private home being built right next door, which started before us and it's still being finished. But we convinced the client that we could structurally retrofit it with a far shorter build time and make it into a modern residence with all the services and exterior and interior specs of a fresh build of standard. They bought into the idea of retrofitting the old building and giving it a new lease of life. We stuck by the existing footprint to the millimeters, saving all the existing trees and creating a small patch of sanity among all the high-rises being built around. Ladakh was and is a dream. It's a beautiful willow orchard. We had 100-year-old willow trees, twisted and gnarly. We designed a simple all-weather property designed to handle a variation of plus 30 degrees Celsius to minus 25 degrees, built in timber and soil from the site and granite from a neighboring quarry in Shea. Absolutely no steel and cement used wherever. The only common ground in all of these was probably our approach to the build. We have no preconceived style or character, but what we feel is suitable and appropriate to the site and the brief. The first property in Mumbai was a big blocky mass, a parameter of high FSI, which was granted by the authorities. The math dictating that we maximize it come which may, an extremely high, extremely strict AAI height limit, a very limiting AAI height limit, high volume banquet, 30 and 40 meter clear spans which were needed. I'm given to say that it's the largest private one after this one which we're standing in out here, and open pool terraces. It's a challenging program in a challenging site, made the way all more difficult for us when the client said they wanted an old building. They were adamant that they neither wanted a glass box or a masonry box like the adjacent structures, and doubled down on their preference for a neoclassical building. It's something which I'm still unsure about. We had the choice of saying no, but the greed of the challenge of the build won us over. The jury's still out in my mind. It's a 50-50 project for us. There's the joy in engineering it and resolving it and getting it built, whereas it's also what we sort of stepped in out here and ended up tacking on a skin, a literal facade like a Western storefront or a Disney build, which was way, way out of our design comfort zone. We put in a concerted effort to turn the narrative, develop the design in the way that we still had the flexibility in the outer skin and visual intent, right up to an advanced stage of design. We worked with the operators' design teams who also tried to convince the client to go into something more contemporary and cleaner, convince them on the advantages of cost and the ease of execution. We thought we were home free when the client first agreed. This was short-lived, however, when in a client family meeting, they doubled down and said, we still want a neoclassical building, and it's a take it or leave it proposition. We worked with the structural consultants out here, having bitten the bullet. We worked with the structural consultants and the teams out here to do it as a structural steel and precast concrete build because of site logistics and extremely large footprint of the building, covering almost 70% of the site as such. And then we reached out to Pico in Finland for delta beams and to girder slab in the US for shorter spans of D beams, where we managed to get structural spans of 8 to 12 meters with 300 deep beams. So now what we were able to achieve while pushing this across to the client is on every floor, saving about 300 or 400 millimeters of structural depth. We were able to add one extra floor within the AAI height limit. And that gave us a lot more flexibility in being able to open out more space around the building or within the building by being able to achieve the FSI within the permissible height which we had. We got D-beams from Girder Slab USA, another proprietary system for the smaller spans, and it was an intensive exercise working with the proof consultants in IIT on getting this proofed and accepted within Indian codal norms, running them through the American codes and the European codes, and a lot of to and fro to get them to agree to this, sitting flush with the hollow core slabs. So we have complete 12-meter spans out here within a 300 depth, keeping in mind the seismic considerations and the latest building codes, which are not too conducive towards going for flat slabs and getting them approved and operationalized to our benefit. All of these happened in parallel to the design stage, with the detailed cost analysis being done at every time to get in a buy-in on the increased costs of getting in these proprietary systems and selling the client the benefits of being able to, of the extra floor and what it managed to get us in terms of build time, finish, and process. Another slide of the build, an extremely complicated build which we had to sit and engineer together and get it in place. This is the house which we inherited in Mumbai. It was an old 1975 build, like we had mentioned earlier, and extremely poor condition internally, terrible spaces, 8.5 foot ceilings, low levels, and funny arches and positions all around. We went about repurposing the space. We started structurally stitching and surgically strengthening the existing build, knocking down the walls, working with varying beam depths, introducing steel columns, atypical solutions on a case-to-case basis with a constant to and fro with the structural team. So it was almost a parameter with no existing drawings of knocking out things, finding out what was there, getting it reanalyzed, getting it remodeled, getting to see how it would work, changing depths of positions or strengthening things further, and worked over a period of 12 months to complete and transform what we had on the left to what we finished building on the right of the image. Meanwhile, in Ladakh, a beautiful site, almost like some of our other projects, a shame to have to build out there. But this lovely old willow orchard, we sited all our units sitting within the willow clusters, within the natural forms created by the trees and the slopes. Not a twig was touched, and the natural grades were retained as is. Sitting with the local residents, a common refrain was always in terms of the loss of heat via the flow in peak winter. Traditionally, they were very conscious of orientation, capturing the southern sun, their lifeblood, packing in a foot of earth on the roof for their thermal mass. And they, however, never took their foundations below the frost line for their single-story structures. It's a very common practice in the West, in Scandinavia, and in the US of you go below the frost line, you ensure that the cold does not seep in, the earth doesn't freeze below and seep upwards, but that was something which traditionally they never bothered to do. We investigated and established the frost line to be about 5 feet below, and while factoring the costs of having, and the time of, because we have a very limited season of construction, and factoring the time of having to take our foundations down that additional 3-odd feet further, in order to cut the frost line down, and both in cost as well as build time. What we ended up doing while researching is we came across what are called frost-protected shallow foundations. This was being experimented in Canada and the northern United States, again, for the same reason, to avoid the cost of building smaller basements or taking foundations below the frost line. It turned out that people in Finland and Norway were doing it since the 30s. So we reached out to Topi Pakinen of Pico, from whom we bought the delta beams in Helsinki, and we got real-time data and analysis which they developed over time of how they would go about protecting the foundations externally with EPS, and we ran the math on the benefits. So basically, by doing this, the frost line turns around and stops on either side of the building, and the ground below the plinth of the building does not freeze. There is no heat loss, which happens downwards from our heated space into the ground. We had greater control on the envelope, but we never had control of what was down below. This enabled us to do that. As of about 10 days back, we tested it at minus 15 degrees Celsius, staying overnight, without our main radiators and heat pumps in place, purely by thermal mass and insulation, and it was a comfortable stay. The only thing we used were electric blankets out there. So the rule of thumb for those who are interested is that by insulating the outer face of the foundation and extending the expanded polystyrene insulation outwards horizontally to the depth of the frost line is what one is able to do to be able to control it and modify it to terminate it against the insulation. We set sun-catching zones to the south as the sunrooms and public spaces. We set sun-catching zones to the south as sunrooms and public spaces with the beds in the center, getting the western sun in and to extend the warmth into the night into the internal sleeping areas. And all our north walls were kept solid to minimize heat loss, heavily insulated. Doing our math, working out with 100 mil of vertical insulation and 150 mil of dense tech roofing insulation, as well as a tricky part in Ladakh, finding the right insulation and waterproofing membranes to be able to function at minus 30 degrees Celsius, getting a product which could be guaranteed, getting vendors of the product who are willing to go there and work in those climatic conditions and be able to set that up. While we were in the third basement of the first project, the hotel project in Mumbai, where the roofs had been cast and we were nearing the basement 2 roof, our columns were fabricated, everything was in place, we got a letter from the metro authorities saying that new metro lines had been proposed linking up the existing T2 terminal with the new airport, which was awarded over 5 or 6 years back. And these were to run right under the center of the building. We were already aware of the metro lines which were earlier proposed to the side, and we had set the building and isolated the building for vibration against the metro lines on the side. But the ones which were then coming right along the center was something which we had just not planned for at all. The metro guys broke out when they figured out that the basement rafts were just 4 meters below the crown. The client broke out when he figured out that the solid rock strata which we had there would transmit an extremely high level of vibration to the floors above, which he just could not take a chance on. I remember checking with some acquaintances of ours in golf links in Delhi who, in spite the best assurances they got from DMRC, I mean, they stay in 200 crore plus houses, but they know the metro timetable of when the 6:30 a.m. train passes underneath down below, which was something which we just couldn't step into. So we started researching into suitable vibration isolation systems, endless discussions on frequencies, 3.5 and 6 gigahertz hertz systems, before we narrowed down on isolating the superstructure at the B2 roof level using vibration isolation springs from Gerb in Germany. In a normal scenario, the easiest process, I mean, it's extreme standard structural stuff that you isolate the raft, you isolate at the bottom, you have the problems, you sort it out at the first point of isolation and build. It's nothing to even bother to talk about. The second stage, which you would otherwise do it on, is when we would segregate the substructure and the superstructure, and we isolated, let's say, at the B1 roof level. We didn't have the luxury of doing it at the B1 roof level because we had planned our kitchens and all our services at that area. We had a lot of our services to hang from the B1 roof, which would have meant that every suspended connection needed a vibration isolator itself in that to avoid the transfer happening further below. So we ended up setting it down, redesigning and re-engineering everything at that stage, and setting all of these springs at the B2 roof level. I'm just showing one slide of all these springs under installation, but it was an intense 3 to 4 month period on an ongoing build during COVID, endless meetings with Dr. Nassim of DMRC, with GERB, with the clients and the structural teams, to be able to set this back in place in an operational and a running project where our entire systems were under construction and under fabrication. Each spring had to be designed to the exact detail load of each column, and they were crystal clear that if there was any point of transmission, whether through the structure or any of the services, it would void any of their guarantees. All services transfers were reworked. Staircase waste slabs were designed to just float 1 inch above each other, next to each other at the point of isolation, which we did to be able to make this work. We clawed back some of these costs which we incurred in setting up these springs by also taking advantage of the seismic isolation we managed, and the superstructure was then further reworked on an ongoing build to reduce shear walls, etc., as added because of codal compliances towards our structural system by being able to show it to the authorities of the seismic isolation which we managed. We were able to convince them to accept the changes in the design and move forward with that. Meanwhile, in the other build in Bombay, we, being schooled on the values of FSI out here and the usable indoor space, we ended up creating a central atrium with a steel and timber skylight, made it the lung of the house inside out here. All the other spaces were reset to flow around and overlook it, and we went about converting the structure, integrating the services, and transforming it into a home. So these were all happening in parallel. Our site visits in Mumbai was coming and spending 3/4 of the day dealing with the complications and the problems which we had out here, and moving down further to the suburbs and working on a totally different paradigm, scale, context, and completely different material palette and process. At the same time, in Ladakh, when we were building, we built with sun-dried mud blocks, which were all made out of site as locally done by them, hand-quarried sites from a neighboring, stone from a neighboring quarry, all in mud mortar, and an SPF structure, which will, SPF structure expressed internally and out. All our walls were plastered with mud plaster with a markalak lape. That's a finishing, it's an extremely fine mud. Those who have traveled in Ladakh would have seen certain areas where the colors have suddenly become a much lighter yellow, and it just gives a lovely surface finish over that, which is what we use to plaster all our internal walls out there. Working with a pan-Indian crew, the people who are willing to work out there, stonemasons from Nepal, Ladakhi masons for the mud block masonry and the mud plaster teams, and the timber structures we got made in Delhi and got them assembled on site. This is pictures of the structures coming up, and actually, no cement at all. No cement whatsoever completely in this project, no steel at all whatsoever in this project, barring whatever came in into a bit of our services. And more snaps of what we were building out there. When having bitten the bullet to give this neoclassical facade to our client and building in steel, and quite a long way into our design, taking a call that we're building this as a clean steel structure and being able to tack on a skin, we developed a system of precast concrete panels externally to be able to just set in place. So again, the basics of neoclassical architecture, you have the base, you have the middle, you have the top, stepping in, it's like a wedding cake which gets built, and it created a lot of complications, again, working with the stone cladding vendors in terms of the lengths of the clamps, the distances and the heights as we had to keep getting in, and our limestone thicknesses were quite high. So we worked out this system of precast concrete panels with varying nib sizes. So These were standardized as 6 different modules, which lent itself to 12 different cladding panel types, which were mixed and matched throughout the building as we moved up. And each of these ribs were in varying proportions, heights, and spacing, basis what was our final cladding design, which was to come out on top and to sit on top of that. So they worked off these coming in, and then the panels get set up in different patterns and modules as they move forward out here. This is the building as it got built. The last part of it came up in about the last 9 to 10 months of just the structure coming up and the precast concrete panels. This is somewhere near where it is. They've still not cleaned up the facade. And like I said, it's still there. Is whether I still fly into T2 or not will depend on how it finally shapes up. I will decide to just fly in via T1 and not drive past this building at all. At the same time, while doing this, the project which did get us a lot of joy was carrying on this exercise of converting this old 1975 built house, giving it a completely 50-year fresh lease of life, not breaking it down at all, saving every tree around that, and converting it into a clean, simple, modern residence, modern to present-day parameters of what are expected by them as luxury and standard in their interior spaces. And like I said, we had these lovely trees all around, all got saved, all got protected, and in the process of making a beautiful terrace garden on top for this family. This is what the project in Ladakh finished off as. Every inch and surface of the material is as naturally built and expressed. There is nothing superfluous. So what we did in both the prior projects, which I just showed, there was everything superfluous. Everything had a skin, everything had a layer, everything had something tacked on this. Whereas in this project, there was not an inch of anything. Even my bed back was a structural partition, which was rising up out there, forming the space. There's nothing cladded on at any stage. There's no veneer, there's nothing other than solid wood, granite as locally sourced, and solid timber, which was used for the beams. That's it. Thank you.